Well, good evening, everybody, and happy Earth Day. I am Mike Nelson, the Chief Meteorologist at Denver 7 here in Denver, Colorado. We're delighted to have a wonderful presentation lined up for you tonight on this 50th anniversary of Earth Day. We're talking about climate change, the science, and the solutions, and our invited speakers are just top notch, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. What we're going to do tonight is a virtual presentation of the science and solutions for the challenge of global warming and climate change. And I'd like to begin by thanking the management and the technical staff at both Denver 7 and at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science for making this event possible. The Institute for Science and Policy is a project of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science that provides the tools and the environment to promote better policy making using science. They encourage Americans to talk and to listen to each other and to solve the problems through civil dialogue and scientific thinking. When we began to plan this program, the world was a very different place. Our initial plan was to hold a big gathering in the IMAX Theater at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. But with the COVID-19 pandemic, those plans certainly changed dramatically. But a few weeks ago, we decided that a virtual program actually offered an attractive option that might open up the evening to a regional, a national, and perhaps even a worldwide audience. Our plan tonight is to have each of our featured speakers present a 10 to 15-minute PowerPoint. We'll hold off the questions and the discussion until all the speakers have finished, likely a little bit before 8 p.m. Our guests this evening are experts in their fields, very busy people, and we're honored to have them with us tonight. I think you'll find all of their presentations to be thoughtful, well-researched, and inspiring. I will begin the program with a brief explanation on the science of global warming as soon as I put on my glasses and find my PowerPoint. Okay. Is it there now?
There it is. Thank you.
That's the biggest hurdle I had in the whole night, ladies and gentlemen. So, all right, here we go. Communicating climate change, Earth Day at 50 years old. I am Mike Nelson, the Chief Meteorologist with Denver 7 at KMGH TV in Denver, Colorado. I am an AMS Fellow. Only 1% of the American Meteorological Society's membership is elevated to the level of fellow, and there have only been less than 30 broadcast meteorologists that have ever reached that level in the society. Most of the fellows are researchers and academics, so it's a small fraction of us TV folks. Mike.Nelson at denverchannel.com. My Facebook is Mike Nelson Denver 7, and my Twitter is Mike Nelson 247. So let's go here. Well, folks, the world has certainly changed in the past few weeks, and I found this cartoon recently. A man and his dog, and the guy says, "Until now, I never understood why you got so excited when somebody walked past the house." It's so true. Now, one of the questions that are often asked of me, television meteorologists truly are the station scientists. And in that light, we are invited into the public's living rooms across our cities, our states, and around the nation. And so we already cover many topics that aren't necessarily weather. If there is a meteor shower, we're asked to talk about it. If there's an earthquake, the news director comes to us and says, "Can you tell us about the earthquake?" Tsunamis, volcanoes, we are asked to be the scientists, the experts to talk about these. So I think we have a responsibility and an opportunity to teach the facts to our audience about our changing climate. This was from last year's presentation. It's one of my favorite slides, and we need to start worrying about the kind of world we're going to leave for Keith Richards. Because let's face it, no matter what happens, Keith will probably still be here. Now, global warming was not really on the radar, if you will, when I started my television career over 40 years ago. And I had big hair then. Now I have less big hair and a lot more gray hair, as you can see. Some pictures of me from back in the day. You can see the earliest models of the television weather computers, circa 1979 in the upper left. And gradually they improved as the years went on. And over the course of 40 years, we have seen an amazing revolution in technology in what we do with computers, which gives me great hope for what's coming next in terms of the types of technological advantage we'll see in the next 25 to 40 years. As many of you know, in the Colorado area, I really enjoy speaking at schools. I've been doing it virtually during this pandemic, but I typically visit about 100 schools a year. And over the course of 40 years, on the back of the envelope calculation, we figure I've probably spoken to about 1 million kids. That's a picture of me on the left there with my 35 millimeter slides back in the late 1970s. And part of the reason that I do this is our schools are filled with the children that are going to be the future engineers, the scientists, the inventors, and the leaders of our country. Uh, One of my favorite stories, you see the picture from Lockheed Martin there. They were building one of the new GOES satellites a couple of years ago, and I went out to their facility, which is near Denver, to do a story about it. When I finished my stand up, there were all of these technicians in their white suits came over behind me and said, "Mr. We take a selfie with you?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. Why?" And they said, "Oh, you totally came to our grade schools when we were little kids." I'm thinking that's what it's all about. These guys are now rocket scientists. In part, I hope that because I came to speak at their school. This came in just over the weekend. That's Evelyn. Evelyn's about 8. And Evelyn had written to me a while back about some questions for her weather project. And you can see the conclusion there where she says, "Now that I know what weather can do, I still find weather interesting. I might decide to be a meteorologist when I grow up because I'm really interested in weather." Evelyn, you go. You might be just the person that solves a lot of the problems that we face. And I grew up in the space age in the 60s, and the Apollo project just had me absolutely inspired. And today, I think unfairly we denigrate some of our scientists because some of the things that they talk about are perhaps a little not pleasant to hear about when we talk about some of the problems we face. We need to have our scientists be rock stars. We must inspire our children to engage in math and science. Remember, the problems are real, but the solutions can be found. Encourage kids to ask the questions and seek the answers. And when I speak to school kids, I thank them for what they're going to discover in the next 30 years. So, quickly on climate change. What do we know for sure? One of the questions I always get is, "Hey, Mike, climate's always changed. Why do we think something different's happening now?" The fact that we know why we have ice ages and mass extinctions and continental drift is exactly why we know what's happening now. We know the causes: changes in the shape of the orbit, changes in solar output, changes in atmospheric chemistry. And of those three things, only one is changing fast, folks, and that is the chemistry of the atmosphere. Today, about 414 parts per million. And this is not new science, folks. This predates Al Gore's grandparents. In 1825, Joseph Fourier, the Fourier series for you mathematicians, understood the Earth was too far away from the sun to be as warm as it was, and it was the atmosphere that was trapping that heat, making it habitable. In 1863, Abraham Lincoln was the president. John Tyndall, an Irish chemist, realized that carbon dioxide was the gas absorbing the long wave or Earth energy. And Svante Arrhenius in 1895 calculated a doubling of global CO2 would warm the Earth by several degrees. And let's not forget Eunice Foote. In the 19th century, women were not necessarily recognized as they should have been as scientific experts, but Eunice was an American scientist who placed jars with different gases in the sun and took their temperature and noticed that it was the CO2 that warmed up the most. That was in 1856. You go, Eunice. And we also know the science is not political. Without the greenhouse effect, the Earth would be 60 degrees colder and would be a lifeless ice planet. But it's too much of a good thing. Each doubling of carbon dioxide increases the energy retention by 3.7 watts per square meter over every square meter of the Earth. It's the same amount as a child's nightlight or an old-fashioned Christmas tree light bulb, but that's a huge amount of energy over the entire Earth. And we know the ice is melting. The forcing from that doubling is about perhaps 5 degrees Fahrenheit of warming over the entire Earth, melting the ice caps and raising the sea levels 5 to 10 feet, maybe more in the next century. But Mike, people say CO2 is just a trace gas. Well, think about each molecule of CO2 like a feather in a down comforter, helping to trap heat in the atmosphere. So we make that blanket, that comforter thicker, trapping more heat. And if we had the same amount of carbon monoxide in our atmosphere right now, we would be unconscious and close to death. The key thing, small amounts do matter. Okay, weather and climate. Climate's a long-term average. Weather is chaotic and changes rapidly. To expect Miami to be warmer than Denver in February, that's the climate. Of course, you might plan to go to Miami and they got a cold front and it's in the 50s there, while Denver's in the 70s in January. Didn't change the climate of Miami. You just had bad weather luck. which means it's actually easier to predict climate than it is weather. It's basic thermodynamics. Add heat, it gets warmer. It's why day is warmer than night, summer is warmer than winter. Well, a lot of the CO2 we put in the atmosphere is going to be there for centuries, so there's not much in the short term we can do to stall or reverse the warming, but we can plan to mitigate the impacts. Better water storage, conservation, road construction techniques, fire and forest policies, better warnings, change zoning, agricultural techniques, and smart and effective regulations. And we need to electrify everything. And that's going to take a lot of electrons because the power to produce the electricity to move one electric car is the same amount of power for one house. For one electric bus, it's 400 houses. And for an electric truck, it's 700 houses. But we have a lot of wind and solar resources. Look at these maps from NREL of the solar and the wind concentrations. And this quote from Thomas Edison: "I'd put my money on sun and solar energy. What a source of power. I hope we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that." And we need a modern grid to help move all of that around. But change can be dramatic and fast. Picture on the left, New York City, 8th Avenue, Easter Sunday. There's one car. 13 years later, same street, there's one horse. We are seeing these changes now, folks. Many high-paying jobs right here in Colorado, many more jobs in renewable energy than coal, and you cannot import wind turbines. They're too big. They have to be built right here. I'm going to finish up with a few quotes. "The significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking with which we created them." Albert Einstein. "When it is asked how much it will cost to protect the environment, one more question should be asked. What will it cost our civilization if we do not?" Gaylord Nelson, founder of Earth Day. And "Today, our concern must be with the future, for the world is changing. The old era is ending. The old ways will not do." John F. Kennedy. You see the summit meeting there, all those great things, and somebody says, what if it's a hoax and we just create a better world for nothing? We've done this before, folks. Great and expensive projects have been completed in our past. They didn't bankrupt us. They made the world a better place. The railroad, indoor plumbing, rural electrification, the Manhattan Project, the interstate, NASA and the Apollo program, fiber optics, high-speed computing, the internet. John F. Kennedy, 1960. We stand today on the edge of a new frontier, a frontier of unknown opportunities and perils. It would be easier to shrink back from that new frontier, but the times demand new invention, innovation, imagination, and decision. Our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Our next moonshot, folks, is figuring out how to stop lighting carbon on fire. It's not just about the polar bears, it's about our children and our grandchildren. That is Owen and Liam and Josephine, and beneath that, the rest of my family. That is why I speak out. Thank you so much for your time tonight. And now we'll move on to the rest of our program. So, our first guest tonight is Dr. Dion Rossiter. Dee, as she's known to her friends, has a PhD in Earth and Planetary Science from the University of California. She now serves as the Executive Director of Science at UC Berkeley. Among their various projects at Berkeley is the goal of sharing the excitement and relevance of scientific research with the public through events such as this one. Through her efforts, Dr. Rossiter continues to inspire many young people to pursue careers in science and research, and we are honored to have her with us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Dee Rossiter.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, everyone. I am going to apologize just in case my internet is acting up. Everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yes, perfect. So hopefully nothing goes wrong here. um, yes, SE. So what that means is I work with scientists and scientific institutions to better work with all these different pieces of society, like education and industry and business and policymakers and the media, to try to make sure that scientists are communicating with these groups and doing so effectively. So I got into climate communication because my background is in climate science. And it just made sense that I went through graduate school, I went through undergrad thinking, why is there this misalignment between what all the things that scientists are saying and what the public believes? And this isn't unique to climate science. I put up evolution. I mean, that's one that's been going on for as long as we can remember, right? Vaccines, GMOs, all these issues are this a misalignment, not just climate science. And the question is, why do we have this problem? I'm not going to go too far into that and really, focus on that too much. But the question is this anti-intellectualism? Is it misinformation campaigns? What is it? So I'm just going to give you a few of the reasons behind why we have these misalignments. First, we know that there's a cultural and political divide. This is a Pew study on percentage of adults who say human activity contributes to global climate change. And you can see the spectrum from conservative to liberal Democrats between a great deal is that dark blue line, right? So that goes to 14% to 84% as you move through the spectrum. So that's pretty well understood and known. There's this other idea that economists and climate, well, they're always in battle. And we're seeing that, and scientists really, we're seeing that right now as it relates to coronavirus. Is it the economy or is it keeping people at home, right? Is it the economy or is it forming climate change solutions? And it doesn't have to be that way. Mike talked about it. The other panelists will talk about it too. There's also a disinformation campaign. If you haven't read or seen Merchants of Doubt, please do. It's all about this exactly as it relates to climate change. Intuitively, how can me, just one little person, be changing the climate of a 4.5 billion year old ginormous Earth, right? It just doesn't make sense. There's a science illiteracy problem, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that at the end of my presentation. When I go through equity, I'm going to specifically talk about equity. But what I'm going to focus on, why I'm here, is we're going to talk about how we communicate climate change. So there's this old school thinking that if we just give people more information, more data, more facts, more plots, more research studies, they'll understand. It's that they don't know, right? That's all it is people just don't know. Well, this is my favorite Onion article, new climate change study, just 400 pages of scientists telling Americans to read previous climate change study, right? We do this all the time. Another thing that we do is we just get louder, right? We get angrier, louder, repeat ourselves over and over and louder and louder. And we know that the deficit model and just getting angry doesn't work. So I'm going to talk about communication as it relates to this triangle. I'll present how to be an effective communicator as it relates to this triangle of self, audience, and narrative. So I'm going to start with self. That sounds very meta, right? But what I mean by that is by being an effective communicator is, again, not just about the knowledge coming out, but also about how the attitudes looking in and how people perceive us as communicators. I'm just putting this reference up here in case people want to go back after the presentation and look at this study specifically. But the things that I'm going to talk about today come from that study. So the perceptions and attitudes towards communicators is determined by how much folks respect and trust who's talking, who's communicating, right? Do people respect science? The answer is, in fact, that they do. Besides military officers and firefighters, doctors, scientists, nurses, and engineers, we're respected. People tend to believe what we say as it relates to lots of different kinds of scientific content, right? But there's that other piece, the piece of trust. Do people trust science? Do people trust scientists? This is where things get a little bit sticky. Who do people trust? Well, people trust people who are like them, who are part of their clique, who are part of their community and their family. And I want to point out that that makes you, the listener, the watcher right now, best equipped to communicate with your friends and family. That can get us into sticky situations because if we're misinformed, then we're sharing things that might be false. But you're here today, meaning you want to learn and you want to listen, right? You want to hear what we have to say. So take what you're learning and communicate that with your friends and family. What if they don't know? What if I'm not part of their community? How do we decide? Well, a listener will decide if a communicator is competent and warm. Okay, this will be important later too when we get to equity. But just do people think that we're competent? Well, yeah, like I said, they respect us. They think we're competent. But are we warm? Turns out, are we friend? Are we foe? Scientists, along with lawyers and accountants, fall on this faux category. We're not perceived as the most warm people. No offense to the lawyers and the accountants out there. We're all part of the same group. We all need to work harder on being warmer. But what that means, the lesson from this self triangle is be warm and communicate with those around you. As it relates to our audience, this is a big one also, because we know that the deficit model doesn't work, but what does work? Well, if I have a specific message, my climate change message is X, I can't just go around and tell everyone the same climate change message. I have to formulate and model my message for every single different audience member that I communicate with. So am I communicating to the general public? Am I communicating to scientists? Who are the folks I'm communicating? And that's going to determine what I say. There are a bunch of groups who create toolkits. So you can go online and find from Eco America. They have a great one. It's called Let's Talk About Climate. And what they do is they formulate messages based on what these different groups want and need and care about and think about, what pop culture you can reference, those sorts of things. So it's a great resource. I hope that you check it out. The last thing, which is a little bit is fun, is thinking about narrative. What that means, how are we going to craft our message, right? And what communicators need to do is they actually need to choose their words carefully. I pulled up some examples of words that have double meaning as it relates to a scientific sense, or just what the public think it means. That's words like uncertainty, which means to scientists, and in a scientific context, it means range. But to the public, it sounds like we're confused about something, right? This is the same feedback. It means vicious cycle, but the public thinks it means praise. I taught an entire college lecture on feedbacks, right? It's not something simple that people are just automatically going to understand. So we want to avoid a whole mess of words just like this with these double meanings. We also want to be really positive and action oriented. My sister called me today because my baby niece, who's in kindergarten, watched a video on Earth Day and the environment, and it made her cry. And I had to come in and save the day and make sure that I gave her some positive, action-oriented words. These are some words we're going to try not to use: regulate, reduce, cut, control, restrict. As it relates to climate change, there's historically been a lot of this. We don't want to scare everyone off and act as though this isn't a fixable issue. So we're going to use the words on the right side of your screen. I told you that story about my niece because storytelling is actually a very powerful tool. This is another study that shows that telling you a story, the parts of your brain that are being activated are identical to the parts of the brain that are being activated in my brain. And when you go and tell that story to somebody else, the parts of their brain are being activated, the same parts of the brain that were being activated when I told the story. Storytelling is the most effective way to communicate, okay? We gets us all on the same page. We feel the same things. Our emotions are the same. It's very effective. There's more to that, but I'm just going to summarize everything as it relates to Climate Communication 101, recipes for good communication, keep things clear, simple, plain language, repeat messages often. Again, this is going to take some time. You're going to have to practice over and over with different audiences. Use stories. Stories are memorable and relatable. I'm going to push that over to the side because I just like to juxtaposition what the scientific community and the scientific world does is they use a lot of jargon. It's not clear and simple. They include a lot of data and caveats. It's not the same message repeated often. And the data speaks for itself. We don't tell stories. So we're urging everyone when they communicate about climate change, not just scientists, everybody, to use these techniques: simple, clear messages, repeated, memorable. Every time I get an opportunity to get in front of a group, I want to talk about access and equity in science and science communication. And it very, very much relates to climate change and climate change communication. Here's just a plot. This is a study, a Pew Research study that shows, no surprise, science literacy is related to gender, race, and education. More educated you are, men and white Americans are more science literate. Also, we're going a little bit deeper into this race issue. This shows that college educated African Americans are less science literate than non-college educated whites. What this tells us is that this is a systematic problem. We already know that that climate change and pandemics disproportionately affects communities who are vulnerable, communities of color, or communities with access to resources. The consequence of this, well, if I think about who is a scientist and who's allowed to be a part of science communication, every day there's a headline like this. New studies suggest people have a hard time believing Black and Latino women are scientists. Flight attendant to Black female doctor. We're looking for actual physicians. And the most recent, do you remember this picture of Greta Thunberg at the World Economic Forum? Well, they had actually cut out future Dr. Vanessa Nakate from Uganda. And she said not only did they cut out her picture, they cut out an entire continent. And this is one of these things that's going to have a trickle effect across all other types of consequences. So normally in a talk, I'd say, give me some consequences to what I just showed you about illiteracy and how people perceive people of color. I would ask for your input, but I'm going to give you a few of my own right now. Limited to access to information, limited in our access to services, and the list goes on, all of these things. Again, climate change is affecting people of color and under-resourced communities disproportionately, and all of these reasons are the science communication and the science world is not as inclusive as it needs to be. So I'm going to end there. So thank you, everyone. I know I have to stop.
Dee, thank you so very much. That was just absolutely terrific. And I couldn't help but think some of the same issues that we see in terms of challenges with the COVID-19 virus, that we're seeing the same communities that are disadvantaged are suffering the most.
Yes, there's so many. I could have brought in 20 times I wanted to reference coronavirus. So I'm sure our audience members saw those parallels as well too.
Right, right. And I find it interesting when one of the pushbacks is, well, we owe it to the third world that they modernize using fossil fuels like we did for the last 150 years, which is a bit like saying, you can't have one of these. You've got to have an old dial-up phone with a cord, and you have to modernize like we did. They're not going to do that. You put in a solar panel or a wind turbine to a village in the third world, you change the life in that village. You take out the kerosene lamp and put in an LED lamp, and so you're not breathing in fumes at night to try and read, you transform it.
Exactly.
So that is something that they're going to modernize very differently than what we did. But Dr.
Yes.
Oster, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mike.
Okay. Well, changing the way we power our world is vital to reducing the amount of carbon dioxide that's being added to our atmosphere. And electric utilities play a huge role, especially as internal combustion engines are replaced by electric vehicles. One of the things you've noticed without the traffic, so the pictures of Los Angeles or in India where the air is suddenly so clear because we're not burning all that gasoline, putting all the fumes in the atmosphere. But it's going to take a lot of electricity. I talked about earlier. One electric car uses the same amount of power as a house. One electric truck as much as 700 houses. Well, Xcel Energy is one of the leading utilities in replacing carbon-based fuels with renewable sources. Their motive is not just that it's the right thing to do for the planet, it also makes good business sense. Alice Jackson is the president of Xcel Energy in Colorado. She's been with Xcel for nearly a decade and has been in the energy industry for over 17 years. Ms. Jackson has a degree in management information systems from Texas A&M and has completed the Harvard Business School program for leadership development. Ms. Jackson, thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening, everyone. So now here comes my biggest challenge, is getting the PowerPoint presentation to come up myself. Okay, my fellow panelists, if you can see it, can you give me a nod? Okay, we'll go ahead and get rolling here. Thank you, Mike, for the introduction. It truly is a pleasure to meet with all of you this evening. Hopefully you're enjoying the comfort of your home as you join with us for a little bit of a talk about science, community, and possibilities. As Mike said, and I'm really excited, some of the things in the future are going to be changing pretty dramatically. And I'm going to do my best to follow Dee's advice here and make sure that I'm plenty warm for the conversation And I'm going to try and avoid some of those words, but you'll have to forgive me because at the end of the day, at the root, you heard my background on education. I'm a little bit of a geek, and I spent plenty of years in regulatory. So, but as Mike said, my name is Alice Jackson, and I truly have the pleasure to serve as the president of Excel Energy here in Colorado. So I want to start our conversation off today about how, you know what, this really is a journey. You heard about all the differences in history. Mike did a great job of walking back to the 1800s and even earlier with some of the technology that even early scientists were looking at. We really are on a journey of science and technology, but I would also say that we're very much on a journey of community, of tradition, and of business evolution. And I like to also say there's a bit of adventure in here too. Tonight, I'd like to join you and take you on a little bit of a short walk through the electric history here in Colorado and beyond, and take a look at, you know, what not only have we done to date, but where we're going a little bit in the future. Now, our modern day adventure with renewable energy and changing our system substantially to the types of resources we use to make the energy that powers your homes started not all that long ago, but our energy adventure has a much longer history. In fact, Excel Energy in Colorado, we have had the pleasure to live, work, and play in our communities for over 150 years. Now, some of you that are paying attention to this presentation would sit there and go, now, wait a minute, was it really Excel Energy? Most of you probably are more familiar with the title of our company, Public Service Company of Colorado, which is who we still are. And before that, long way back, it was originally founded as Denver Power and Light. We're actually the second oldest corporation here in the state of Colorado, just behind the Metro Denver Chamber of Commerce. So it's been a real pleasure to be able to serve here. But if you think about it, in the 1800s and late 1800s, it wasn't electricity that we were providing to our customers here. In fact, it was street lighting services, gas lights to be specific, downtown Denver via horse and buggy, riding around, lighting the lights in the evening so that people could walk around and be safe on the downtown street. And then in the mornings, coming back around and extinguishing them. The next thing I would say is, though, is when you sit back and you think about what that environment might have been like, and then you think about where we are today, I can't help but think about the possibilities of going forward, because the innovation from where we were then 150 years ago to where we are today is truly tremendous. Let's fast forward a little bit from the 1800s and bring us up to some of the modern day and what we've been seeing. So up on your screen, you'll see that I have put up there just a map of where we operate here in the state of Colorado to give you a picture of the various communities that we get to serve. You'll notice it's not just the Denver metro area. There are plenty of rural communities across Colorado that we have the pleasure to serve, both on the electric side, but on the gas side as well. On the electric side of the business, though, let's focus a little bit on what those fuel mixes had looked like. So back in 2005, you see there with the pie chart that it shows that, you know, coal was our predominant generating resource. And in 2018, you see that there's been a pretty significant change. There was a fairly revolutionary turning point for our state in looking at what was possible and where we were going to go as the future. That was in 2004. And in 2004, the good people of the state of Colorado, through a ballot initiative, voted to initiate the first constitutionally based renewable portfolio standard. That renewable energy standard started this dialogue that we've been having and started the pathway for us to look at what that renewable energy could look like on our system. Now, back in 2004, not everyone was excited about the advent of the variable energy resources like wind and solar, because they do come with a bit of uncertainty. Back in 2004, we didn't have the tools that we needed in order to be able to integrate wind and solar on our system in ways that were truly impactful, meaning we couldn't forecast it. And by the way, not even I have a bat phone that I can call in and say, hey, God, can you make the wind blow a little bit more at these hours of the day? Or can you move those clouds aside so that the sun will shine and make energy for our customers so that they can keep their homes warm, keep them chilled in the summertime, and keep the products and services that they make from their businesses going. So in 2004, we started this journey. And you can see from the numbers that I have up on the screen as well, we've made quite a dent in making this progress forward. So in 2005, we had absolutely no solar on our system. But by 2026, we're going to have over 2,000 megawatts. In wind, we've made tremendous advances as well. But it hasn't just been about the size of these numbers coming in and law making this happen. One of the incredibly important pieces of this is it also makes sense economically. So when you look at the numbers that are up on the screen for the wind, back when we first started procuring wind on our system in the early 2005, 2006 timeframe, it cost us about 6.9 cents per kilowatt hour. When we acquired it through the electric resource plan that we had to go through last year, and we finished up in 2018, it was 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Truly innovation and those types of technologies coming to commercial viability has made it possible for us to make the advancements that we have made. Now, what does this mean for you all? The technology that we worked on with NREL and NCAR, has made it possible for us to integrate more and more of these renewable resources on our system. And so what that turns into is we've made some pretty significant progress. And the proof truly is in the pudding. In 2019, we achieved a 44% carbon reduction from our 2005 levels. And also what this means is that we're going to be reaching a 55% renewables on our system by 2026. On the previous slide, I showed you the various numbers between 2005 and 2026, because those resources and those quantities of wind and solar have already been approved, are already in construction, and will be online between now and 2026. What this means for the state of Colorado is that we will be reaching that 55% renewable resources on our system. That means every kilowatt hour that you consume in your home, every business, without having to do anything else, 55% of that energy that you consume will come from a renewable resource. And that's due to the technology, the innovation, and the advancements that we've partnered on with a number of agencies, a number of businesses across the country, but quite frankly, right here in our own backyard with great laboratories like NREL. Also, what this means, though, is it's a 60% carbon reduction from our 2005 levels in that same time frame. And that is what we truly need to look at, because that not only meets, but it surpasses the U.S. Paris climate commitments, and it also surpasses the Clean Power Plan goals. We are truly making a difference here in the state of Colorado and figuring out how to move things forward. And when I say the proof is in the pudding, this same time frame that you see up on your screen here through 2019, our customers also enjoyed over a 5% reduction in their total bills that they pay for electricity. That means not only are we doing the right thing for the planet, not only are we doing the right thing for the next generation, but we're doing the right thing for your pocketbook. So, at the risk of sounding like an infomercial, but wait, there's more. While we already have approved at the Public Utilities Commission how to move forward through 2026 with those carbon reductions that I was mentioning before, our company undertook a long-term look at what the potential was for our company, not only in Colorado, but across all 8 of the states that we have the pleasure to serve. And on December 4th of 2018, I had the pleasure of standing with our chairman and CEO at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science and announcing a bold vision for not only Colorado, but all 8 of those states, that we would achieve an 80% carbon reduction by 2030 and aim for 100% carbon reduction in our electricity production by 2050. Now, I'll be the first to tell you to sit here and that we have results and we know what the technology is and we can achieve the targets of 2030. That 80% carbon reduction is one that is definitely possible. And it's also economically viable for our customers. And we were really clear in the guardrails that we put up there in evaluating this and taking the steps forward for all of our customers and communities that we keep 2 very important pieces of the puzzle in sight the entire time. The first is safety and reliability. We have to keep the lights on. Your power has to keep flowing so that you can live your life and do the things that you are doing and the things that you want to do and the things that you're looking for the potential to do. The other guardrail is cost for our customers. We can't break the bank because we recognize that we underpin the economic development of our communities, which means jobs, and it means futures for all of our children and our grandchildren as we move forward. Now, when we turn to what it looks like between that 80% carbon reduction in 2030 and that 2050 vision of 100% electricity from carbon-free resources, we really have to start looking again at technology and science and the other things that we will have to be investing in over these next several years. I'll be the first to tell you as well on this one that we don't exactly know exactly what those technologies are going to be, but our focus has to clearly be on what are known as dispatchable zero carbon resources. That means just like I was talking about before, where I don't have a bat phone that I can call and have the wind blow stronger, the sun shine brighter, the clouds move out of the way, I also still need to fill the gaps in on how to keep the electricity on all 8,760 hours a year, despite what type of resource that it's coming from. And there are a lot of possibilities. We're really excited about the potential that's out there. And Mike, I really do think your point about talking with the children and educating them on what the potential is incredibly important. Because while we are currently researching and we're looking at natural gas with carbon capture, or deep rock geothermal, or advanced nuclear, or seasonal storage, or advanced pumped hydro, there are technologies out there, and I'm a firm believer that there's some middle schooler out there that has an idea about what it is that's going to solve this. And at some point in time, we're all going to sit back and go, gosh, why didn't I think of that? So I'm really excited to see what comes forward in the technologies that develop. Our purpose and our looking at this long-term vision is figuring out what are those problem statements that we can put out there so that those middle schoolers, those private entities, the universities, the laboratories, they all have the opportunity to research and focus on the gaps that we've identified in order to truly reach this successful future. Because at the end of the day, this started with our customers and this started with our communities. Whether it was the renewable energy standard or our customers and our communities coming to us, looking to us for solutions on how we could provide a better energy future, different fuel mixes for our customers, and figure out a way to keep it economic so that our society and our economies could keep moving forward. That is what it's been about. Our communities coming together to figure out what the pathway is forward and finding a successful way to deliver on it. So thank you very much for your interest, your time, and your community involvement. I look forward to answering any kinds of questions that you may have today in regards to this, but very proud and very pleased to be able to be your electric and energy provider here in the state of Colorado. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alice Jackson. Incredible presentation. And I think what is really inspiring on it is the fact that we're doing this right now. I mean, this is happening. It's not, oh, this is too expensive for the energy. You talk about how the renewable prices have come down. It is just stunning how the changes have happened. So great to see Excel
Absolutely.
leading on this. Thank you very much. So finding the solutions to better power our world has been the mission for the National Renewable Energy Lab since its inception back in the 1970s. NREL advances the science and engineering of energy efficiency, sustainable transportation, and renewable power technologies, and it's headquartered right here in Golden, Colorado. Dr. Paul Denholm is a leading researcher in electric grid applications for energy storage and solar energy. His area of expertise is in modeling electric power systems to best integrate renewable energy sources and energy storage for when the sun is not shining or the wind is not blowing. Dr. Denholm has his PhD in land resources and energy analysis and policy from the University of Wisconsin, my alma mater. Go Badgers. And we greatly appreciate your time and expertise, Dr. Denholm.
Thanks, Mike. So happy to be here, and it's always interesting doing these kinds of things remotely. So we'll see how this goes. So yeah, I work at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. I've been there for about 15 years, and I've got a great job. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do and what some of the other folks do at NREL. So the challenge that we're really talking about here is basically what Alice talked about, and that is the fact that every day utilities like Xcel Energy in Colorado and around the country and around the world have to deal with how we provide electricity, the demands on electricity that are made by our kind of our everyday activities. It's basically how we live our lives, how we kind of go about our days. And it starts when you wake up and make breakfast if you've got an electric stove, and turn on your oven. And then maybe you turn on the morning cartoons for your kids, especially now, or teaching them at home with your online lessons. And then you get to work and you turn on your computer. All of that's increasing the demand for electricity. And Xcel and again other utilities have to meet that demand and those variations in demand. So in the summer, your air conditioner comes on, and this is a curve. Actually, this is actual data from utilities here in Colorado and Wyoming, and this shows how the demand for electricity varies as a function of time of day. And so in the morning, that demand for electricity starts to increase, and then peaks up at around 4, 5, 6 p.m. And that's right around the time the sun is setting. So we'll have to think about that, and we'll return to that. but those variations of demand can be quite high during the summer. In the winter, we kind of see the spike for demand increasing right around sunset and when your lights are on and maybe you've got electric heat. But overall, utilities have to provide electricity both when it is needed and where it's needed. And that where also changes depending on time of day and season. So, for decades, utilities in the US and around the world have relied on a mix of power plants to provide this electricity. They use hydroelectric plants and nuclear plants, and a lot of these plants burn coal, and a lot of these plants also burn natural gas. So, this has produced reliable electricity, but has also reliably produced carbon dioxide. So now there's the quest, and that quest is that utilities in the US and around the world are looking towards low or zero carbon options to provide electricity. And some of these options include wind and solar. So the focus on our work at the National Renewable Energy Lab is to develop advanced technologies that can provide low cost, reliable solutions for generating this energy without carbon. So our focus is not just about generation technologies or not just around electricity generation technologies, but we also focus on things like making energy in buildings more efficient, used more efficiently. We also look at new vehicle technologies, and we've helped pioneer a lot of the solar technologies that are being used around the world. So certain solar cells were kind of basically invented right here at NREL and have been deployed at large scale. We also have improved wind turbine technologies. And through advanced technology development and large scale manufacturing, some of which occurs right here in Colorado, the price of renewable resources has decreased dramatically. So this is the cost, this is a relative cost curve that shows the declining cost just since 2010 for wind and solar and electric vehicle batteries. So you can see that those costs are coming down dramatically. Now, in the US, we have great solar resources. The dark red areas in this map show really world-class, absolutely world-class solar resources. But even with the declining costs of renewable energy or solar technologies, the areas in kind of the orange and even the yellow areas are increasingly cost competitive. But again, we're really blessed here in Colorado with some really fantastic solar resources. And likewise, our wind resources in the US are really world-class. So the darker blue colors in this map are the areas with really good wind resources. So you can kind of see that in the eastern plains of Colorado and up in Wyoming, we've just got some tremendous wind resources that we can continue to tap. And Excel's already using a lot of that, but there's still a lot more that can be tapped as well. So that's the good news, but getting carbon out of the electric grid does involve more than just adding wind and solar. So I talked about how the demand for electricity in the summer peaks right around 5, 6 p.m., and that's right around the time that the sun's starting to set and the output from our solar panels is decreasing. The wind tends not to blow right then as well. So we need to make sure that the demand for electricity can be met with renewable resources and figure out ways of making this whole grid work when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing. So that's a big part of what I do at NREL. So I've got a great job. I can use I get to use these powerful supercomputers like this one shown here, and we do a bunch of simulations of the nation's power system to understand how different combinations of renewables might provide reliable electricity. So if we go back to 15, 20 years ago, utilities didn't really think we could do much more than about 10 or 20% renewables. And so what we've done working with utility partners throughout the US is understand by, again, these computer simulations, how we can actually achieve these higher levels of renewable penetration. So at first we were working on things like forecasting wind and solar so that utilities would understand how to control the rest of their system. And then we've kind of explored getting beyond 10, 20%, looking at 30% and beyond. And what we found is it really requires thinking about how you run the grid a little bit differently. What are some things that you can do that you might have to make this all work a little bit more efficiently. So one of the things that we've done is created a bunch of visualization tools so that we can go and talk to utilities and say, okay, what if you work more with your neighbors, have larger cooperation from the next door utility, so you can buy and sell electricity. So maybe they've got more wind than they need during some hours. Maybe they've got more solar than they need during some hours. Can we can we find ways to exchange this power through markets and other mechanisms to make all this work more efficiently? So this is an example of some simulations we did that looked at 30% of the US electricity coming from a mix of wind and solar resources. And you can kind of just see the little dots represent different wind plants and solar plants scattered throughout the country. And this is combined with understanding how the rest of the generation resources and transmission is working. So you can kind of go online, you can find some more of this. This is just kind of a little bit of a teaser to show that what we've done, again, working with our utility partners. Since then, we've looked at even higher roles of renewable energy. So in 2012, we published a study looking at how the US could get to 80% of the nation's electricity derived from renewables. Again, all in a cost-effective manner, because we cannot ignore cost and we certainly can't ignore reliability. Since then, we've embarked on even more ambitious efforts, looking at places like Los Angeles, looking at how they might get to 100% renewable energy, and other regions around the country as well. A big part of this has been helped by the rapidly declining cost of battery storage. So these cost curves show the kind of projections and the continued decline in batteries. So we're not talking about electric vehicle batteries, we're talking about stationary batteries like the one shown on the right. These can charge electricity from wind in the middle of the night or solar during kind of 11 to noon. And then you reset energy a few hours later when that demand for electricity peaks. So battery technologies and other energy storage will help a lot, as well as electric vehicles that can be charged when there's an abundance of wind and solar. So this will require some smart grid type technologies for communication, so we understand what's the best time to charge these vehicles with wind and solar, all of course while making sure that you've got the vehicle available when you actually need it. This, combined with things like longer duration storage, such as pumped hydro storage, this can get us most of the way to eliminating carbon from the electric system. The problem is we need to really focus on the last little bit, and that's a big part of what we do now at the National Renewable Energy Lab, is getting to the finish line, or figuring out those last little bits. Again, Alice alluded to this. What are the technologies we're going to need to completely decarbonize the electric sector? And that means, what are we going to do about the fossil generation that we need right now on really hot days, maybe hot, hazy days where the solar production isn't quite as high, maybe it's still, there's not a whole lot of wind, or maybe those cold days where your solar panels are covered in snow or it's just really cloudy. Those are going to require new technologies. So this last little bit, it's not as easy as it might sound. In fact, it's really going to be difficult. We're going to need a combination of new technologies to get there, including seasonal storage, really, really cheap renewables, and renewables that may work in locations where we're not currently deploying them. So one example is, how can we maybe use the abundance of renewable energy in the spring to make some kind of storable fuel and use that fuel later? You'll also hear about hydrogen technologies. That may be one option, but there are other fuels such as synthetic natural gas that could be made with renewable energy, stored, and then used later on. We've demonstrated many of these technologies in the lab, but producing, storing, and using these fuels, again, in a cost-effective manner, that's going to require new science, technology, and engineering. So one of the things that would help is if we could get really low cost renewable energy, like 1 cent electricity from 1 cent per kilowatt hour electricity from wind and solar. So this might include technologies such as perovskite solar cells, which could be made quickly and cheaply on a machine like a printing press. We've looked at advanced wind technologies, like looking at ways we can control wind turbines through advanced visualization to get more energy out of every single wind turbine, or, sorry about that, or offshore wind technologies. Maybe this would include floating offshore wind, and that could help offshore wind become an important part of our renewable energy mix, particularly in parts of the country that don't have great onshore or land-based wind resources, some of our coastal regions. There could be entirely new ways of generating renewable energy, such as using the power of waves. And we can't ignore how we can also make these renewable energy resources deployed in the most environmentally friendly manner. One of the ways would be to be deploying floating solar on regions. We've looked at this and found that maybe we could get 10% of the nation's electricity from solar deployed on man-made reservoirs. We're not putting solar on kind of natural regions. We're putting these on man-made reservoirs to decrease their environmental impact. We've also looked at best ways of combining solar on agricultural lands to preserve topsoil, benefit native and other beneficial species, again, improving soil health and other kind of co-benefits between solar and land use. Beyond renewables, we're also looking at things like new enzymes that could eat plastic wastes that could help combat our planet's pollution problem. So in combination, we're really looking at a wide variety of options to help innovate our way out of the decarbonization problem and make our Earth a greener, cleaner place. So thank you for your time. And with that, I'll pass it back to Mike. Thanks.
I really liked that one picture where you had the kind of the 3D thing with the wind coming at you and you're wearing the glasses and stuff. You got to have a pretty cool job. With times that I've been out at NREL, it's just a really neat place. What can you say to somebody that wants to do what you do?
Go to school and study science and engineering and math and apply, because we've got a great team, and it's always great adding folks to that team. I always enjoy intern season during the summer. So if you're an undergrad or even a grad student, we have internships available. But keep an eye out, and I'd love to meet you. And it's always, again, a great thrill for the new enthusiastic folks who enjoy NREL, whether it be the physical scientists working on new solar technologies or folks like me that do computer modeling of the grid. It's just a great opportunity. So if you get a chance to join us at NREL, we'd love to have you.
We need more energy rock star scientists out there, that's for sure. Wow. Thank you to all of our terrific speakers tonight. What we'd like to do now is to open up the presentation to our virtual guests watching from across Colorado and perhaps from around the world. And we'll offer a question and answer session for 10 or 15 minutes, and would ask that the questions and comments just remain thoughtful and polite and focus on finding answers and solutions. So let's take a look at some of the questions that we have here. Let's see here. Okay, about one for Alice. What can customers do to help Excel even get further along on what we're doing in terms of renewables?
It's a great question. There's a number of things that we have to call on our customers to help with on this. The first is, it's not all just adding new renewables to the system. I think one of the other pieces of the puzzle that we have to talk about, Mike, is you're probably familiar with our Saver Switch program. And how we call on people's air conditioners during the summer in order to keep the peaks a little bit lower so we don't have to build another generation resource. We need our customers to truly partner with us on how they're going to charge their devices, such as electric vehicles, as we move forward as well. So adding more renewables to the system, we are on that one as quick as we possibly can in order to maintain all the reliability and the cost, as well as to get us moving. As you heard me talk about the 55%. What makes it even easier for us to reach those carbon goals is when our customers really partner with us on how they charge and how they consume, which is why you also see us coming to you all and talking about what are called time of use rates. What time of use rates are is during those summer times when we're really hitting those peaks. We're trying to encourage you to not use electricity during those times when it's at the highest peak, the highest cost of electricity, so that we don't have to build those other resources. We're starting to match those up with when we can get the biggest production out of our wind and our solar. So if you have an EV, make sure you're charging it at night. As you continue to electrify your homes or other areas of your business, doing the same thing. So this is going to be very much, hopefully, a symbiotic relationship where we have to rely on each other. And there's some things that our customers can do, even as we're building as many wind farms, solar farms, and other resources as we can on our side.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Another question, this one's for Paul on battery storage. These batteries are big and heavy. How much will we be able to stack those up vertically, do you foresee in the future?
We haven't figured that out yet. So we're kind of relatively new with this battery technology. Most of them are being deployed in essentially something that looks like a shipping container. And they're not being deployed like in downtown areas yet. So right now we're not really stacking them yet. So there are a lot of people that talk about stacking them, and certainly in urban areas, there's no real technical reason why you can't do that. We do have to deal with some fire code issues to make sure that they're safe. Again, these are relatively new, so we haven't really figured out how many of these you can kind of stack up yet.
Okay,
Hey, Mike, if I could jump in on this one, just for the,
Sure.
the listeners' perspective, one of the rules of thumb that we use is for every 2 megawatts of battery storage that you're talking about, it's about the size of a shipping container. And so if you imagine about stacking those up, you're not going to want a really tall stack unless then you're going to also paint the outside and make it look like a building or something. So,
Okay.
so keep
Okay.
that in mind when you're thinking about where they might be.
I'll throw this question out to all of our panelists here. The environmental impact on materials that are needed for renewables, whether it be from the mining or disposing of the blades when they've reached their life cycle, changes out in solar panels, the silicon, etc. Who'd ever like to take a shot at that one?
Well, I can talk a little bit about that because one of the things that we do actually at NREL is we have a aggressive program on something called life cycle assessment. And so we've got some world pioneers at NREL who do that work and essentially evaluate the comparative impacts of renewables compared to other resources. And in general, kind of compared to our traditional fossil resources, those impacts are low. There are some specific issues that have to be dealt with. And so one of the biggest things, and again, something that we're working on actively, is making sure that the recycling chains are developed so that when these batteries reach the end of their life, they're recycled effectively. And so it's really no different than your lead acid battery, car battery. That's kind of I would say the best example of something where an entire industry has been created, and now that's a very closed loop. So lead is bad for the environment. All of your cars still have lead acid batteries, but the recycling rates on those are incredibly high. So all we have to do is create the same kinds of recycling industries that exist for some of these other technologies.
Okay, very good. By the way, it is right up at 8 o'clock, and at least in my neighborhood, they're howling as we're doing during this. So, can we all give out a little howl for all of our first responders and our healthcare providers? Very good, very good. Paul, you mentioned a little bit about pollution aspects and stuff, and I want to throw this one out as well. I had a few questions about the mix of nuclear energy into all of this, because certainly that is a not a fossil fuel producing type of energy, very expensive. Certainly the accidents that we've had in places like 3 Mile and Chernobyl and Fukushima raise major concerns. But and I joked earlier that fusion is always just 25 years away, but any thoughts on where we are in terms of that being part of the mix as we move forward in the next 25 to 30 years?
Well, I'd love to hear Alice's opinion on this. I mean, our focus at NREL is, of course, on renewables. However, we also have to acknowledge that we're not just designing a renewable grid, we're understanding how renewables fit into the mix. So certainly we've done a lot of work working with some of our partner labs, like Idaho National Lab, that looks at next generation nuclear technologies. So if those pan out with whether it's a small modular reactor or new flexible designs, one of the things that we're working with, again, with our partners at the Nuclear Energy Office at DOE, is understanding how that can be part of the mix. And so we're figuring that out, as we go along. And I think if and when those technologies come along, we'll be well on our way to figuring out how everything can kind of work well together and play together as well.
Yeah.
Alice?
No, this is an incredibly important topic because as of right now, wind, solar, and battery storage is not enough to get us to a zero carbon future. At least not in the existing technological format that we have today. Paul may have some ideas for us on how to fix some of those gaps, but we're not quite there yet. So we're looking for those zero carbon resources. In Minnesota, as part of our company, we have a couple of nuclear facilities, so we're very familiar with the technology. And we are encouraged and optimistic about the small modular reactor potential. Idaho National Laboratories, as mentioned by Paul, is about to break ground on one of the first ones here in the United States. And we're going to be watching really closely to see how that comes together. The technological design and the advancements that have come to bear since, the units that you were mentioning, Mike, where most people remember Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, and they're very different. In fact, they have virtually no footprint above ground whatsoever. From the early testing in the science and technology, it is practically impossible for them to have the same type of incident as we've seen in the past for these resources. So there's some strong potential. They're also much smaller. Most nuclear reactors around the world, I think we were talking about this in our prep call, are very large resources, 750 megawatts and larger, so incredibly expensive. By being able to build these in smaller modular pieces, they're less expensive. You can locate them in a variety of different locations, so they're more diversified. They're safer, and so there's some strong potential here, but we'll be watching.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Here's a question, and I'd like Dee to weigh in on this one. Certainly in California, where you are, oil and gas is a huge part of the economy, and it is here in Colorado as well. And I have some very good friends that are in the oil and gas business. They're not bad people; they're wonderful people. They work hard, and they've supplied a great amount of energy. And I like to say fossil fuels have been miraculous. Without fossil fuels, life on Earth is cold and dark and short. And so there's no doubt that fossil fuels have revolutionized the world. The unfortunate thing is the carbon produced warms the planet. So the question we have is, how do we ensure that the oil and gas industry doesn't get left behind in our transition to renewables, and how can that industry be part of the solution?
It's funny because I come from an earth and planetary sciences background. While I wasn't a climate scientist and studying the atmosphere and its system, but I'm also an earth scientist. I'm surrounded by geologists who are moving into these sectors as well. So it was really interesting to be side by side with fellow scientists who are working on these solutions. The best part is that those companies, as you know, are recognizing that this is an avenue and a way that they have to start thinking about these other products. So I don't think that oil and gas is going to be left behind. I mean, all of what we've learned is there is that transition. The transition is going to take time. The scientists are still going to be valuable. The resources, the oil and gas is still going to be important, because as we make this transition, it's not going to be instantaneous. So I don't see it as a left behind. I see it as a transition. Right. And the industry is evolving. I'm being told that I'm unstable and the industry is evolving. And I think that no one should fear being left behind in any way,
Well, and incredibly smart people. I talked about how do they know where to drill an oil well? I mean, when people, they don't just look out there and say, put it right there. It's the same thing when we talk about how do we know past climate, by core samples and by research and understanding, rebuilding the past. And so the same brilliant people that have been very, very effective at helping us find these fossil fuels, hopefully we can transition to where we find the answers we need to stop putting as much carbon in the atmosphere, and perhaps even talking about the future of carbon sequestration. I've wondered if back after the nuclear instance with Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, if the coal industry said, we've got this 1,000-year resource, but the unfortunate part is it produces a lot of carbon dioxide. Can we get a moonshot to help us figure out how to effectively sequester the carbon rather than trying to pretend that it wasn't a problem? If we had addressed the CO2 release, maybe we'd have large-scale carbon sequestration figured out now.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And the folks who are investing oil and gas, it needs to be transitioned over into the investment through these programs, the companies and who are really making these broad changes in the technology. And also I want to point out, as you were saying, that the technology is also becoming more efficient and cleaner in and of itself, right? So it's a double-edged sword. You want it to end, but it is, as the other technology is building and growing and becoming also more efficient, so is the oil and gas industry as well, because they realize we don't got much time left, right?
Yeah, right. Dee, while you're on a roll here, we have a question for you from a viewer saying, I'm curious how you responded to your niece. What are your recommendations on how to talk to young people about climate change?
Yeah. Okay. So this is a really interesting how I responded to her, because the message framing. So it was actually kind of easy, because my niece, although she's 5 and in kindergarten, she's very religious. And and this can be really hard for some folks to talk about religion and climate change, and thinking like, like religious folks, and the earth is only X number of thousands of years old versus 4.5 billion years old. So it can be isolating, and there can be a disconnect. And what I told her that, how Jesus wants you to be nice to people, and when you're nice to people, it makes you feel good. And she said, yes. And I said, well, he also says that you should be nice to the earth. And when you're nice to the earth, this is also the action oriented piece too. So if you do things that are nice to the earth, then you'll feel better and it won't be scary and it won't be sad. It'll feel like you're making a difference. So with the framing, because my sister said, I didn't even think about bringing Jesus into this. And I'm like, no, you got to think about what she likes, what she cares about. And again, making it action oriented. As it relates to talking to kids in general, I think that that's the key. You go online, Google children climate change messaging. You will get article after article similar. They are scared. I was not surprised to hear that she started crying about the environment. Not at all. Kids are scared and they feel as though they're being stuck with a problem that they can't solve, right?
Yeah.
That they're cleaning up a mess that they did not create. So it's a very scary time for students, and it can feel like nothing can be done. So again, staying positive and that action oriented. What can we do? How can we make ourselves feel better by doing things, however that translates for. And I remember being a kid and I wanted those solutions too. How could I be involved? That's a great question.
One of the things I do when I talk to the school kids, I hold up my phone and I say, these did not even exist 15 or 20 years ago, and they have the power of a supercomputer from 25 or 30 years ago. We carry them in our pockets. And recently, a little second grader, raised her hand and she goes, if these didn't exist, how did we take selfies?
That's the important part of cell phones is that selfie.
Exactly. Alice, this question for you. In California, they have about $58 billion in the last few years invested into renewable energy due to the laws that mandate that power utilities will be penalized if they don't make this happen over to renewables. And this falls also for buildings and transportation. Could we make our builders here, if you want to build a house or build a subdivision in Colorado, which a lot of people want to live here, well, you have to put solar on the house, or you have to install it so that it uses gray water for irrigation. Could we create those kind of laws here to more incentivize this happening faster?
You could create the laws and you could create those rules. I would argue that they're not necessarily needed at this point in time. So some perfect examples here in our Colorado communities. If you go down to Sterling Ranch, which is located on the southwest side of town, they have pretty much solar on every single location. They reclaim water, clean it, and use it in their communities. They really are a living laboratory of how to build this neighborhood of the future, and they look at everything from indoor water use to outdoor. They have dual meters on gas and electric to any of the homes and communities, and they're collecting a huge data set in order to be able to help us all figure out what does this look like moving forward. We also have other builders like Lennar Homes, who has communities where they have solar available for every single rooftop. What I would say is that when you look at the physics of the system, you don't need it on every roof and you don't need it in every community. So there's really a balance of the system that we have to think about and how that all comes together because it interplays. We could put solar on every single rooftop. The problem is that it would all produce at exactly the same time. And because those same people are trying to make up their entire year's worth of usage, but the sun only shines, I'm going to lay something really astounding out here, only about 10 hours a day to produce that energy, you have to overbuild that production, and it would overwhelm the distribution system as well as overwhelm the rest of the pieces. So until we figure out the battery piece of the puzzle, we still have some gaps. So there are some great ways to move this forward, but there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle already in play. It's just we probably don't communicate about them as much as we otherwise could.
Question for you. I have an EV and I have solar panels on my house. Should I program it so my car charges at 9 o'clock in the morning versus in the middle of the night?
Well, that all depends on when you're home and when you're driving.
Yeah.
So the way that if you're looking for personal benefit, then absolutely, because you're going to have that behind the meter generation and consumption simultaneously. If you're looking for system level optimization, then you would actually want your solar to be generating during the day and still charge that EV at night. And so that may be your best bet. Also, as we move to those time of use rates I was talking about, you're going to want to sell that solar back whenever it's high price and charge your EV when it's really inexpensive. And then your personal will be aligned with the system as well.
Okay, good to know. I have to get the old battery wall in here at some day, I guess. Well, that'll probably come as well. Dee, this is a question that just came in. What are some of the best resources for science educators to help students of color have their voices be heard and contribute their ideas in a system that does not always acknowledge their voices? Are you with us, Dee?
Yeah, I heard that. I think I read that. It says my internet is unstable. Can you hear me
Yeah.
okay?
You're
Okay.
coming through now really well. Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like it's the what do you think are some of the best resources outlets for science educators to help students of color?
Yep.
So the fact that this person, thank you, Jenna, is even asking the question, thank you, Jenna. It means that she cares. And whoever, obviously, this is something we're all very concerned about right now. In terms of resources for outlets, this avenue right now is through a museum. I actually work at a museum also at UC Berkeley at the Lawrence Hall of Science. Get in contact with museums, have lots of programs that are ongoing for outreach, especially working with students of color. Talk to, Mike, you're available. Just kidding. There's a lot. You have to really, I would say, think locally. That's going to be most important. Think about what's going on in your local environment. And I can help people do that. I did have my email up there, and I'm not lying when I say I want people to contact me, because I can't think of a resource right off the top of my head. But another thing I want to say is right now, especially when we're using our phones for everything and Zoom for everything, and there's all this social media, it's just such an open opportunity to create our own spaces in a way that resonates with students of color. One thing I want to say, and I say this constantly, and I want people to hear me about when I say this, if you're wondering how you can reach out to a community, regardless of what community that is, whether it's a community of color, whether or not it's teens, whether or not, under one neighborhood, another neighborhood, you have to ask them, what is it they need? Because if we as educators and as communicators and people who are sharing information and who are looked at to share that information, don't engage first and figure out the need of the community and what they want and what they can handle and what is appropriate, then we're doing them a disservice, because my goals and my view of what they need is probably wrong. I need to really include them in that. So have that conversation with the community leaders, look at the different communities, community groups, the libraries, things, the different, maybe there's a Boys and Girls Club or a YMCA, partner with them. Partnerships is key. I'm like, now this is a long answer because I have all of these ideas. Partner with the group, find out what they need, come up with a plan that is a conversation back and forth, because I can't tell you what your community needs.
Okay.
But I would love to point you to some resources if you email me.
Very good. Thank you,
Yeah.
Dee. Question I have for both Paul and Alice primarily is about our electric grid across the United States in terms of, is it up to standards for an EMP or a massive solar flare? Also, I've heard talk about doing a direct current buried underground interstate highway for electrons that would more efficiently move power from one location to another, would be shielded from EMP or from a solar flare. Probably be $1 trillion investment, but recently it seems like a couple $1 trillion just is out there for some reason. Your thoughts on our grid and the improvements that may be ahead of us in the decades to come?
So Paul, I'll jump in and then you can correct me where I get it wrong. How about that? So we already have a significant number of devices on our system, and we're connected to looking at, the solar flares and the potential impacts that it can have, mainly on our transmission infrastructure. So the phase angle regulators, other pieces of the puzzle that we have to correct our system so that the voltage and the stability don't get damaged when they come across. Because we're not asking our customers going, okay, we're going to turn off your power for about 4 hours while this flows through. No, we've got to figure out how to keep it on when we're already seeing those come our direction. So there's a lot of security built into the system in order to accommodate those. As far as more man-made, interruptions of the system, cybersecurity is one of the bigger areas that we look at more than the EMP concerns. But that is, continuously something that we have to look at, stay ahead of, and quite frankly, be ready for the fact that inevitably we're going to have those types of incidents and we'll have to recover from them well. So there's a lot of building around looking at these and putting things together. So Paul, I'll turn it to you for some more deep science.
Sure. So I agree with everything you said. And I would also agree that I think that the focus, like places like the Department of Energy and our work at NREL, is more on the cybersecurity thing. And let me just, I also have an EV. And Alice, one of my frustrations, of course, is that I, as an analyst, know that sometimes during the spring, you have more wind than you know what to do with, and you actually have to turn off your wind turbines. I would love for you to send me that signal and tell me when to charge my car, so I know that I'm charging 100% with wind energy. But that type of communication, that will come with a whole new set of communication protocols and standards that we'll need to adopt. We'll get there. It's all engineering. It's all communication. I have no doubt we'll get there, but we do need more engineers. And so again, study this stuff in school, study communications, study secure network protocols, so we can get that going, and we can get Excel telling me exactly when to charge my car.
That one's going to come faster than you know.
Well,
Great.
we have had quite a session here tonight, and I appreciate very much our panelists and our viewers, participants, the questions that have come in. I have so many more that are there that I think we're gonna have to do this again, because people want to know about thorium reactors and beaming the electricity in from solar panels in outer space. Some cool ideas. Maybe we've got some great stuff here. I want to thank our terrific speakers. It has just been so great. I want to thank Dr. Dion Rossiter, Ms. Alice Jackson from Excel, and Dr. Paul Denholm for their time and their wonderful information. I also want to thank the management and technical experts at Denver 7 and from the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, Elisa Carlson, who's been helping us get this all together, and Kristen Eulenbrock, who helped organize all this from the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. To our guest panelists, thank you so much for sharing your evening, and happy Earth Day to everybody. I'm Mike Nelson from Denver 7, and we'll bid you good night, and please stay safe during these challenging times. Bye-bye, everybody.